Operation Goodwood begins on the 18th of July, and this is the largest attempt yet by the British to break out to the southeast. Now the day begins with the British and Canadians still in their positions right here east of the Orne River and around Caen, and we're going to see an attack by three corps. One on the left, we have the Canadians on the right advancing into Caen itself and crossing the Odon, while the British 8th Corps, led by Armour, fires through the middle and attempts to take key positions and break out into the open country. Now this battle, like the other large-scale battles that we've seen so far, is preceded by bombardment by heavy and medium bombers, and we'll have a look at some examples as we go. We can see the shaded outline areas, and these are the planned targets for the various bombers, US and British side, and all the other photos I'm going to scatter throughout here as I go are from this exact day. Now, one thing to note on the next page is that the plan was to have a visual control post, or in other words, a forward air controller / JTAC, to put it into modern terms, I suppose, attached to one of these 11th Armored Division brigades, and we'll see what happens there. This had been done in North Africa and in the Mediterranean, but it hadn't been done up until this point exactly like this in Normandy. So we'll keep an eye on how that goes as we proceed. It notes that two groups were also tasked to maintain armed reconnaissance over the area to observe and attack movements by enemy troops to and from the battlefield, and fighter cover was provided to prevent interference by German aircraft and escorts for the Bomber Command heavies. And that's where these Spitfires that we're following come into play here. They're going to provide cover to everything else that's going on, and it is a lot. It says here that in all, over 4,500 Allied aircraft were to take part in this first day of Goodwood. Now it notes here that about 5:30, artillery opens up on German anti-aircraft defenses, and for the next 45 minutes, Lancasters and Halifaxes start to bomb their targets, and over 2,500 tons of bombs rain down, and in the final 10 minutes, 650 tons fell on the village of Cagney. And we have a strike photo. This is from a Halifax strike, and we can see one of the Halifaxes there at the bottom right of the frame, and the huge plumes of dust billowing up from this strike. Now, an after photo taken in August shows the impacts and how the village itself was just laid waste. This, like all the other targets on the day, were German strongpoints. The idea behind the raids being to soften up the defenses as much as possible. At the same time, targets all around the area were being hit. We have the Colombelle Steelworks right down here. This was another, not only an industrial target that was hit many times throughout the war, but a stronghold for the defenders of Caen. The Canadians would shortly hereafter advance through this area, and in the current imagery you can see that the location of this is still, to this day, pretty much just laid waste and hasn't been redeveloped. But to continue on, when the medium bombers of 9th Air Force had arrived at 7 o'clock, about a quarter of them found their targets so obscured by dust they had to turn back without bombing. So too did some of the 8th Air Force Liberators, who went to attack Area 1 on the eastern flank. At 7:45, the artillery begins to open up on positions on the front and to walk forward in phases as the British and Canadian troops advance behind it. So that's where we're going to pick things up on the ground. Now it notes that 11th Armored Division is going to go out first behind this barrage with the task of advancing as far as Limonsil-Fremantle, and then to advance and capture high ground about 5 miles to the south off the map, and they never obviously get that far. And as the armor advances, the infantry comes through and starts to clear these villages and to actually hold this ground that was taken against German counterattacks. It says that the advance went well, the enemy seemed to be completely demoralized by the bombardments, and many gave themselves up to oncoming tanks. And then it notes that the situation was changing. The flow of traffic over the bridges and southwards towards the battlefront was getting behind schedule, and the enemy was recovering from the bombardment and offering stiffer resistance. 88s and Tigers in the Cagney Woods had escaped destruction, as had other defenses to the south. Now, as that's happening on their right, the Canadians are starting to advance into this Colombelle industrial area. They're also encountering very stiff resistance, while on the British left, the 3rd Infantry Division of the 1st Corps made steady advances early on, capturing some key villages, but again ran into heavy resistance. So by about 10 in the morning, I make the situation out to be something like this, with armor having advanced down here, being followed up by infantry who at this point have taken more or less the area that you see here. About that time, further advances by both armor and infantry down here towards the village of Cagney and Imieville are met with opposition from the Germans, who have anti-tank guns and tanks active despite the bombardments, and that stalls that attack. And now we get to a counterattack by the Germans from the south by 1st SS Panzer Division, and then from the southeast by 21st SS Panzer Division. And that's where these two images right here that you see that I haven't gone to yet come into play. And let's have a good close look at what we can see here. And this one is just a random photo that was taken as a reconnaissance aircraft was flying over, having done further work down to the south and to the east. And he probably observed this tank battle going on below and popped off a couple of shots. This is part of that 21st SS Panzer Division counterattack. I can't nail it down to a specific time, but this is as far in as they have pushed so far, so possibly as early as about 11 a.m., maybe as late as 2 p.m. I count 8 tanks right here, and this one is extremely interesting. That's a bomb crater right on that tank, so the tank is either taking cover within the crater, or that could possibly be from a Typhoon or any other fighter bomber strike against these advancing columns. And that's another thing that I did. I looked very, very closely at every single area in these photos, looking for aircraft overhead making these attacks. Now, these guys have advanced, and what I make out from counting the tracks leading to and from these woods is that at least 4 of them started in these woods, and we can see these bomb impact craters. These are from those heavy bomber strikes, and we can see actually that the concentration wasn't so great here that it took out or immobilized or destroyed everything. So a lot of the armor and a lot of the guns that were positioned already up here made it through. So I just think it's so remarkable to be able to go through this imagery and to find, not just in general, hey, here's how it looked during the day. This is something very, very specific that can be pinned down to a very, very specific part of this engagement. Now, to the southwest of that, I actually saved this for last because this one's even more interesting. And I went all out here when it came to getting a very, very high-res mosaic put together on this. Now, we can see, as with that other image, tanks advancing. And just following the tracks, these tanks either started the day, dug in along this road, which is possible, or advanced along this road, and then cut the corner up here into this field. And here again, I was halfway expecting to see a group of Typhoons overhead in this image, but I looked and, yeah, there are no air assets visible, but we do have signs of the engagement ongoing with this tank having just taken a hit, apparently. The smoke coming up like that, that's not been on fire for long. Then following the tracks up, we can see right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 7 tanks, and you can see the way that they're sort of zigzagging their way as they advance. In fact, this one kind of looks like smoke from an impact right there by this tank. That would be taking artillery fire and also direct fire from the British tanks. I mean, this is right smack in the middle of the engagement. You can see the tanks maneuvering, advancing, and retreating as we go. I'll come up here to this group, advancing in sort of a wedge formation. Another one retreating back here. Following the tracks on up as we get to the edge of the frame, the exposure is a little much here on the outskirts, but we can make out at least 3 or 4 more tanks in here and see the overall pattern that they had maneuvered in, with more tracks advancing in this direction. Now over here, just to the east, we have another group coming in. All but 1 or 2 of the tanks have advanced off of the map at this point, but we can see over here another gun site, probably another 88 site like the one we saw earlier in the month around Villers-Bocage. These sites would have been the targets for artillery during those heavy bomber strikes. We've already seen, and we'll see more, just remarkable photos from this era. From the 6th of June, those really stand out, of course. And then another set coming up on the 8th of August that is awe-inspiring. It just really captures the scope and the scale of this war. And then individual photos like this that you just find at random that capture little snapshots in time and give you, or give me at least, a perspective on this that you just can't get from reading these passages over here to the left. Being able to see it like this, I probably learned more about this phase of the war doing this series than I have in X number of years leading up to this. Now, picking up the story again here, it notes that artillery engaged many targets with the aid of air observation planes and forward observation officers, but the guns at this point were reaching the limits of their range. Numerous formations of 2nd Tactical Air Force fighters scoured the countryside, bombing and rocketing any enemy tanks they could see, sometimes within a half-mile of our own. To some extent, they were handicapped when the Air Force officer in the Sherman tank of the 29th Armored Brigade's Visual Control Post was wounded, But the young tank commander took over, and when he was unable to control a strike, the aircraft were directed to an alternate target by the Group Control Center. And I mentioned visual control posts at the beginning, this being the first use of it within theater, and it was just the one VCP, and the controller was wounded, and that was it when it came to direct control of fighters from the ground. That's going to get worked out later in the campaign as more VCPs and more pilots are provided to the Army, but it just wasn't really used by the British at all until later in the campaign, surprisingly. Now, as all that was going on, the Canadians in the west crossed the Orne River, and while the Canadians in the north were attacking down here into the Colombelle area, they were able to force a German withdrawal and capture Caen itself. And it's a shame to sum up something like that in one or two sentences, but when I have actual photos of operations in other places, that's the way it has to go sometimes. So at the end of the day, the line is going to run more or less like that. The bridgehead was expanded to the east and south, but the gains were nothing like what the plan had depicted and what was hoped for, with at the very least, on day one, the villages down as far as here being secured and setting up a further exploitation on the next day. But let me go ahead and set up and we'll have a look at the missions. At the very least, we have a much better context to look at these within than we otherwise would have. So 441 gives us a recap of 5 of our aircraft carried out a frontline patrol at 0500 hours. Much smoke was seen as the result of heavy bombing. At 8:35 hours, 12 aircraft took off on a further frontline patrol. 2 Me-109s were sighted north of Argenton. Flight Lieutenant Mott destroyed one of these, and the other was shared by Flight Lieutenant Copeland and Flight Lieutenant Johnstone. At 12:30 hours, 2 aircraft carried out an air-sea rescue patrol. An oil patch was seen being investigated by a launch and was reported. 2 further uneventful frontline patrols were carried out by 10 and 12 Spitfires, respectively, during the remainder of the day, as well as 2 beach patrols by 2 aircraft in each case. 442 says, up early and airborne at 0510 with 45-gallon tanks for a 2-hour patrol. Very heavy bombing earlier, and great activity along the front. Flying Officer McLean's motor cut and he landed uninjured, but the plane was damaged by fire, Category B. Flight Lieutenant Wright had a very close call. His motor out over the enemy lines, he glided out to sea, started to bail out, and his parachute caught on the coop top. He got back and the motor started, and he pulled out a very short distance above his ship, returning to base at 0600. That is a close call. 3rd patrol for 12 at 14:30 hours and did some strafing. Squadron Leader Dowding's plane hit in the tail by flak. Flying Officer Wilson's port wheel wouldn't come down, and he made a good landing, ground looped, in Category AC. Last patrol at 21:15 for about an hour. The draw was made at 1800 hours for the 100th Hun to be destroyed by 126 Wing. About 1,800 tickets sold, and of the 50 in the squadron, 5 drew pilots. Squadron Leader Dowding 2, and Whitelaw, Marriott, and Morse. About 60 hours of total flying time for the squadron, and 443. Weather clear, warm, and hazy. Squadron heavily engaged today in support of operations to a big army push in the Caen area designed to carry the Allies through to Paris. Flight Lieutenant Prest off non-effective for 2 days due to minor burns on his right hand. A non-effective posting has been requested today for Flight Lieutenant Schenk, who has been non-effective for short periods on several occasions recently. He is being sent to RCAF headquarters, London, for a medical board to determine his stomach troubles and will be lost to the squadron. Intelligence reports indicate that the big push southeast of Caen is proceeding very satisfactorily and ahead of schedule in the evening, and that is a very optimistic intelligence report that they are going off of their ops flying time 50 hours. So let's go through our missions, and as I've been doing before, if there are a lot of missions just going up as patrols, I've condensed them into one. So 441, 0500 to 2010, patrols in squadron strength today of 12 aircraft. And at 0835 to 0935, 2 Me-109s sighted north of Argenton. Flight Lieutenant Mott destroyed one, and Copeland and Johnstone destroyed the other. Uneventful all the way down to, and I'll go ahead and knock out 1230. This is an air-sea rescue patrol carried out that was uneventful. Then more frontline patrols, more beach patrols. Then 1455 to 1555 on a beach patrol. This is just 2 aircraft up. Huns reported at 20,000 feet flying west from positions southeast of Caen, and as this was only 2 aircraft, these aircraft were told to continue with the patrol. and then uneventful down to 2010, and that's the last down for the night. Now, 442 Squadron has a very similar day, 0510 to 2255, carrying out patrols at squadron strength. The first up is 0510, and this was a top cover for heavy bombers. No enemy aircraft opposition. Flight Lead Officer McLean crash-landed on the runway but was uninjured. Jet tank trouble caused 2 early returns, and we remember earlier that directive saying that jet tanks were not to be used within this sector until further notice, and apparently since they needed to be up for a long period of time to cover the bombing, jet tanks were authorized, but we do see the reason that jet tanks were not preferred, with trouble, I would imagine, changing from those tanks to the main tanks. 442 also participated in an air sea rescue patrol. This was 10:05 to 11:15, and they saw over the course of an hour nothing but a large empty grayish dinghy out there in the channel. Now, on the patrol at 10:30, they note uneventful patrol but saw general movement east and southeast of Con, including a tank battle, which we have already looked at in great detail here. This would have been about the time of these counterattacks, so this could be the exact battles that we were just looking at, and in fact probably were. At 14:30, they patrol the same area, and they do shoot up some MET. Flying Officer Wilson crash-landed on the runway when his port oleo leg would not come down. Then later in the evening, scattered MET in the area, 3 flamers and 4 damaged, north of Lasseau. And then 443 has a very similar day. 9 aircraft took off on patrol over Cape Morgan South, patrol uneventful and recalled, and Wing Commander Johnson was leading that patrol. At 8:50, 9 aircraft led by Johnson took off to patrol the battle area, weather fine and still hazy, sky crowded with our aircraft. Accurate, intense, heavy flak encountered southwest of Con, but our aircraft received no damage, no enemy aircraft seen. Nothing of event reported on the next patrol, and then another uneventful patrol, then the last patrol. 1 aircraft returned early due to mechanical trouble, but the patrol ended without incident, and the weather that started very good, we can see, start to deteriorate. By noon, 6/10 at 16,000 feet, visibility 10 to 12 miles hazy. Around 1700, 10/10 cloud, base 10,000, top 10.5, visibility 2 to 3 miles. Around 2200, 10/10, 3,000 to 10,000, visibility 3 miles hazy to 8,000. And that's it for the day when it comes to flying. And we're going to pick up the story again on Operation Goodwood in the morning. So links to this set of photos will be in the video description if you want to check these out on your own. They have done more for me when it comes to capturing the overall scope of these operations, which you're told over and over is massive, talking to, well, back when you could talk to a lot of World War II veterans and reading about it after the fact, but seeing it with an up-close and personal view like this does give it a brand new perspective to me. So at the very least, I am glad that I took as much time as I did on this day, and there is more to come as we go. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the morning of the 19th.